It's time to eat.
What are you hungry for?
Sit down and get ready to consume an abundance of fantasy football knowledge from Ross Tucker and Joe Dolan.
Feed me now. I'm starving.
On the Fantasy Feast Eating Podcast.
Yeah, let's eat, baby. It is the Fantasy Feast Eating Podcast. We are, of course, presented by DraftKings. Love those of you that use the code Ross over at DraftKings or DraftKings Sportsbook. That helps quite a bit. Speaking of DraftKings, by the way, they're hooking us up with a best ball free draft for you guys. But you got to play to win. You got to enter. Here's a couple ways you can enter. And I'm going to start to name contestants each week here on the Fantasy Feast podcast. You get a free entry into a best ball tournament on DraftKings against me and Joe Dolan. All you have to do is sign up over at goodranchers.com, use that code Ross, or rate and review any of our shows. Any of them, Fantasy Feast, Even Money, College Draft, Ross Tucker Football Podcast, and then send me a screenshot after you do. 5 stars, greatest show of all time, blah, blah, blah. Whatever you want to say, I don't care. And then Ross at rosstucker.com. We're probably going to do 3 of these best ball drafts. I absolutely adore the best ball format. I love best ball drafts. I like the slow draft. It's nice to be able to draft convenient. I usually, tee up. When I'm 4 spots away, I tee up the next 5 guys in order, in the order in which I would select them, and boom, we are moving. It is awesome. Speaking of best ball, by the way, that's why we have Graham Barfield on today from fantasypoints.com. He is the expert in best ball format for the guys over at Fantasy Points. You know how I feel about them. Use the code 24FEAST to get all their outstanding content. That's a little discount on the incredible content they have over at fantasypoints.com. We've got Joe on the show, as always, at FG_Dolan, and he brought his guy, Graham Barfield, at Graham Barfield. Graham, welcome back, man. It's been a minute.
It has been a minute. Good morning, guys. Ross, we were just talking about our guy, Tony Boselli, back here, Jags Hall of Famer. I'm excited to chop up some best ball. It's late May, man. It's draft season. ADPs are hot, so excited to talk some fantasy with you guys today.
Well, start there. Start there, Graham.
Yeah, sure.
It's late May, ADPs are hot, it's draft season. Just kind of what you've seen in general, and maybe, Joe, you can chime in as well. Feels like right after the draft, people really start to get excited about these best balls once they know where the rookies have landed.
For sure. So after the draft, ADP was just kind of the Wild West. Second, third, fourth rounds were kind of shaken out. Now it's late May. ADP should be about the same for the rest of the summer, barring any news. As we know, the NFL is just slowly killing OTAs, killing mini camps. So there's really not like a whole lot of news that happens from now until like training camps. So ADP should be pretty solidified. I think really the 2 big things that we're seeing across the best ball landscape right now, no one wants to draft running backs and no one knows who to draft in the second and third rounds. It's just a wide open second and third round this season, unlike we've seen in previous years. And I think it really just comes down to there's like 5 running backs, 6 running backs we feel really, really good about, Joe. They're getting pushed up the board correctly, but the rest of the running back group pretty much are all the ADP followers, especially once you get into the late rounds as people are pushing up receivers. So it's a really, really fun year for best ball just because I think it's kind of a different ADP setup than we've been used to, and especially at the running back position where basically across the board, the RB15 by ADP is going 10, 12 spots later than typical. It's just kind of leading to some different builds than we're more accustomed to. And Joe, I think there's always edge in the best ball streets, but it feels like this year even more so just because of the ADP setup.
There's going to be a couple of guys going in that second round range who are, as you well know, Graham, are going to end up being league-winning type players. And it's just a matter of landing on which one of those guys it is. And I think I'm still working through, and Graham, we should probably have this conversation, frankly. I'm still working through which of these guys I like the best. So, first and foremost, Ross, I want to point out, the first round, I kind of love everybody in the first round. So, Christian McCaffrey, obviously, CeeDee Lamb, Tyreek Hill. I just talked to Marcus Mosher of the Locked On Cowboys podcast, and I asked him flat out, like, what are the chances CeeDee Lamb breaks the single season reception record? And we both agreed that it deserves some serious thought. Obviously, we know what Tyreek Hill did last year. And then some of the other running backs going in the first round, Breece Hall, Bijan Robinson. I think Breece Hall's ADP should be slightly higher than Bijan Robinson's, but sometimes the markets disagree. Jahmyr Gibbs, A.J. Brown, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Puka Nacua. These guys are going in the first round. It's when you get to the second round where you really start to feel a little bit shaky, especially at the wide receiver position. Some of the running backs going in the second round I actually quite like. Jonathan Taylor has been a favorite pick of mine. Saquon Barkley has been a favorite pick of mine just because I think I like pairing him with a first-round wide receiver. But some of the receivers, Marvin Harrison, all right, we love him, but he's never taken an NFL snap. Drake London. The idea of Drake London has always been greater than the reality. Can Kirk Cousins unlock him? Then you have two 49ers receivers going in the second round, Ayuk and Debo. Ayuk's looking for a new contract. Both of these guys have been rumored to be in trade talks. Then you've got Devontae Adams, a potentially disgruntled Devontae Adams who's over 30. Chris Olave, Nico Collins, who now has to contend with Stephon Diggs in that offense, and Mike Evans, who's perpetually underrated for fantasy, but now is going 4 rounds earlier than he did last year. So the second round, I said it on Twitter, and I still kind of agree with it. I haven't made a wide receiver pick that I have liked in that round. One or more of these guys is going to hit, though, Ross, and it's trying to figure out which of these guys is going to hit, who has the highest likelihood of hitting. That's really going to unlock a lot of those fantasy championships in best ball.
So interesting to me listening to both you guys. And I guess it mirrors and matches the league itself, but it's just unbelievable how much fantasy football has changed over the last 20 years. Think about the formats and how they've changed. Think about the positions. I mean, it wasn't that long ago that the first how many guys off the board were running backs,
right.
Joe.
Right.
No, I mean, it
well,
was
some of that is just we're getting sharper. Most best ball leagues, you have to start 3 wide receivers, so there's just an opportunity cost there. You if you're starting 3 wide receivers, you're going to want more depth. You're going to want more high-end talent. So I think we've just become sharper. Instead of pushing up some of these sketchier running backs, we can talk through some of them because, Joe, they're all going off the board. The dead round is not the 4th or 5th, 6th round anymore. It's now 7th through 10. They're all getting pushed back, and receivers are getting pushed up the board. And I think really it just comes down to the depth at receiver. Joe, from pick 15 to 35 down to Cooper Kupp and, Malik Neighbors, it's one big, long, flat tier. And you could make a case for any of the guys at the bottom of the tier, like Michael Pittman, Devonta Smith. All of those guys could outscore, Brandon Ayuk, who's going in the second round. I think the biggest thing I've kind of come around to in the last couple of weeks, doing a ton of drafts, doing a ton of research, working on my rankings every day, I have been pushing Jonathan Taylor up the board as much as I can in the second round. I think he's the one running back in that second round where I feel excellent about his volume. I feel really good about the Colts offense. The big concern for me with JT is just how much Anthony Richardson scores touchdowns in the red zone. Obviously, he only started, played in 11 quarters last year due to injury, but Richardson still is just like a beast inside the 10. I think that's the only concern I have with JT, because behind him, it's Evan Hull and Trey Sermon and, just not a whole lot. I think JT is going to walk into an 80% snap share, and you can get him now in the middle of the second round, pair him with an elite receiver. And Joe, I'm with you. I think the top 10 and top 11 picks are about as sharp as ever. I think it's like a perfect order. But from then on, I've got JT ahead of Jahmyr Gibbs. That's a little bit contrarian. I've got some very contrarian takes in the second round. I actually like Devontae Adams this year. I did not like him last year. Now we can get him as a wide receiver too. But JT has been one guy I've just been moving up my ranks all summer. And I think 13, 14, kind of that 1-2 turn, that's where he should be going.
One question I have to ask you, Graham, and Ross, we've discussed this because we broke down the Blake Corum selection for the Rams. As you well know, Rossi, as a matter of fact, Jack clipped it and put it on social media. Me saying at the end of last year, Kyron Williams was as close to being Christian McCaffrey as you can get without being Christian McCaffrey. Now, people are spooked. He's got this foot injury from minicamp. I have seen Kyron Williams falling to the third round in some best ball drafts. And maybe I am being a complete fish. That's a DFS term, Ross, for somebody that the sharps shoot in the barrel, like shooting fish in a barrel. Maybe I'm being a complete fish, Graham. I cannot let Kyron Williams slide past me in the third round. I just can't do it. I know you've got the Jaguars regalia. You're wearing the hat. You've got the Tony Baselli jersey. We overreacted to Tank Bigsby last year. We overreacted to Zach Charbonnet last year. I don't know. Knowing what I know about what Kyron Williams' role can be, I have had a problem letting him slip past me in the third round.
It's really, really tricky. I actually have him in RB9 at the end of the third round, and it's all because I just like those receivers in the third round way more. I think Cooper Kupp is much safer. Jalen Waddle, Devonta Smith, and Michael Pittman all offer extreme safety. And we were just talking about the opportunity cost. You're going to want, on all your best ball sites, you're going to want at least two great stud receivers. And this year is a great year to get two of them in the first 3 rounds. You can get Jonathan Taylor in the first. I'm with you on Bijan and Brees in the first. However, this third round it's tricky. I think Travis Etienne has a really strong, projection for his workload as well. However, we've been waiting for Trevor Lawrence to take off. We've been waiting for this Jags offense to take off. Like, you can really question the ceiling with him. With Kyron, Sean McVay has always wanted a bell cow back. I think as long as Kyron is healthy, we're going to get some sort of 70-30 split. However, unlike last year, Joe, it's not just Ronnie Rivers backing up Kyron Williams. I think Blake Corum, look, I don't think he's anything great. He didn't score well in yards created, but I think he's much, much better than what they had behind him. And now it gives them a legitimate reason to be like, okay, Kyron actually needs a sip of water. Let's give him a drive off here. We'll put Blake Corum out, and he'll give us basically, maybe 80% of what Kyron can do. That right there, especially compared to some of these receivers that just have amazing floors and great upside in the third round. That's why I'm hammering some of these receivers in the third round. And Joe, I can't understand. A big part of the reason I'm not drafting very many running backs in the third round is Isaiah Pacheco's ADP makes no sense. I would much rather have a receiver in the third, take Isaiah Pacheco in the fourth, James Cook, Joe Mixon in the fifth, as opposed to kind of chasing what might have been Kyron Williams' best season. I think we can say that last year will probably be his best season. I'm much rather taking the safety and upside with receivers and then just really hammering some of these values at running back, because they're all there across the board. We can draft for touches at any point on the board right now.
Well, that's the funny part is I talked about how much I hate all these second round receivers. I love the third round receivers. So
that's the thing. They're all one big tier. Joe, would you be surprised? I was thinking about this morning. Would you be surprised if Jalen Waddle outscored Brandon Ayuk? I mean, they have basically the same target projection.
No, and they're I have the same feeling about Devontae Smith, and you mentioned Michael Pittman as well. That's why I like these guys, because I think mentally, to me, they're kind of the same as I would hate Michael Pittman if he was going in the second round, but he's going in the third. So I'll take Michael Pittman in the third. And one stack that I've done a lot of, I just got goosed in a best ball league, but I've actually done an early Colts stack with Taylor, Pittman, and Richardson.
Oh yeah, I love that.
To me, that's a lot of touchdowns right there. That is a lot of touchdowns.
Well, and it's guaranteed points too, right? We know Pittman's going to get 25% of the targets. We were just talking about JT. He's going to get 80% of the snaps, and Richardson could break fantasy. I was looking at this yesterday. Actually, the Colts were a little more pass heavy in Richardson's 11 quarters of play than they were with Minshew. Obviously, Shane Steichen loves to push the pace. Colts just have so much freaking upside this season. Joe, I got to ask you, how do you feel about the quarterback ADP right now? Last year we were drafting Hurts and Allen, and even Mahomes in the kind of late second, even into the third round. That's gotten pushed back. Do you think that's right, or do you think that's more of just what we were talking about? No one really knows who to draft at receiver, and it's just a big long flat tier, and we're just pushing those guys up.
Yeah, and it the quarterbacks this year, I was literally about to ask you, like, who are some of the guys that you've been drafting the most? And I think, like, best ball for me has always been the players I've drafted already dictate the quarterback I'm going to draft. But that does get precarious at points because you have to monitor the rest of the room. Oh, crap. I'm looking to get Tua because I have Tyreek and this guy already has Waddle. Or I'm looking to get Anthony Richardson because I have Michael Pittman, but this guy who's drafting right near me drafted Jonathan Taylor and might want all that rushing equity. So I was just trying to ask you, like, which quarterbacks have you been comfortable drafting? I'm gonna use a term here, Ross, that DFS players know, and it's creeping into best ball. Which quarterbacks have you been comfortable drafting naked, which means without any supporting cast members? Because I think that's a big situation here that's going to affect ADP as well.
So I'm with you. Typically at quarterback, I'm a conditional drafter. If I draft, AJ Brown at the 9 pick or 10 pick, I'm going to boost up Jalen Hurts a little bit in the third.
Jalen Hurts
maybe
probably becomes your quarterback 1 in that regard, even if Josh Allen is your quarterback 1.
Exactly.
Without context. Yeah.
Exactly. It's a conditional thing. So, like, if you draft Travis Kelce, let's say at 36, like, come right back at that 3-4 turn and get Mahomes. There's 2 guys that I am taking basically regardless of who I have at receiver. And the number 1 guy is Jaden Daniels.
Agreed.
When I first did my best ball ranks, Joe, I had him, he came out at like 75. His ADP is 103. And I was like, all right, I gotta pull back a little bit from this. We were working through projections with John and Chris. It's basically impossible to not have Jaden Daniels inside your top 6 or top 7 when you work through projections and what he can bring as a rusher. And then, oh, by the way, when you take Jaden Daniels in the 9th round, you can draft Jahan Dotson late. You can draft Ben Sinnott late. I like Luke McCaffrey in the late rounds and like the 170s, 180s in best ball. So there's like kind of back end stacking potential with Daniels, but because he has such immense rushing upside, I don't think you have to stack Jaden Daniels. And the same goes for Lamar Jackson. You can make this case with Lamar every single year. Lamar just has freaky rushing upside. Obviously, the concern this year is just the touchdown potential because Derrick Henry's going to get all those goal line carries. They're not going to try to run Lamar inside the 5. But really, Jaden Daniels and Lamar are always the 2 that stick out as 2 guys that you don't necessarily have to have a Raven or a Commander on your team beforehand. And just because they have such sick rushing upside. Like, we're always looking for those dual threat guys. And you can now draft Jaden Daniels well into the 100s, and Anthony Richardson goes 50 picks ahead of him. And I'm not sure there should be that big of a gap between the 2.
We're not sure either one of them's good. Let's be honest. Like,
Hey,
I mean,
but
Anthony
Joe,
Richardson
for fantasy,
played 5
does that
games
matter?
and no, it doesn't. Because, like,
Yeah.
I mean, I think Jaden Daniels, if he ends up not being good in the NFL, it'll resemble Justin Fields, right?
Yep.
At the very least, he has that high-end elite rushing upside. Justin Fields has been a phenomenal fantasy quarterback. He's just a bad real-life one. The extreme example, Ross, is Tim Tebow. Tim Tebow was a great fantasy quarterback. He might have been the worst quarterback I've ever seen play an NFL game, but he was a great fantasy quarterback. So that's the extreme example. But Jaden Daniels, I completely agree with you. Our guy Chris Wecht is doing our projections at fantasypoints.com. And we're just like, hey, Chris, we're really high on Jaden Daniels. And he's like, I am legitimately struggling to put him any lower. Like, that's going to be a guy I think we're going to be way over market on at fantasy points.
So I have a question, and obviously I'm not an expert like you guys are. Why are so many of these quarterbacks dependent on taking one of their other skill guys earlier? Can you explain that to me?
So stacking is the easiest way, I should say, to gain upside and leverage over the field in best ball. So basically, I think of best ball as like a 3-pronged thing, right? You have like your structural takes, like you have to have at least 7 to 8 wide receivers. You have to have at least 4 running backs, at least 2 tight ends, at least 2 quarterbacks. Like, you have to draft structurally sound to make sure you're getting enough points at each position. The second thing I'm looking for, and we're trying to take down tournaments and win tournaments, we're looking for upside. We're looking for bankable, projectable upside. And last year, if you were one of the few that was taking CJ Stroud and Texans receivers late. You were stacking up one of the highest scoring, best fantasy offenses, and you were doing it at basically no cost. A couple years ago, the Jags were really cheap. Trevor Lawrence had a solid year, and they provided some spiked weeks late. So really, you're just trying to maximize what happens when you're right. That's the way I think of it. It's like when you draft A.J. Brown at 9, we want the Eagles to be a top 3 scoring offense. We want, Brown to get 140, 150 targets, score 9, 10, 11, 12 touchdowns with Jalen Hurts playing all 15 games, 16 games. The third thing I'm thinking about is how those stacks relate to the rest of our roster. So if you have a Christian McCaffrey, a blue chip running back who you can bank on for 20 points every single week, plus high scoring stacks, you're automatically going to have more upside, more high scoring variance than your opponents. So it's not just, you're not just looking for upside. You're not just looking for the right stacks. You're looking for how they interact with the rest of your roster, and especially looking at where you're weak. So if you have Christian McCaffrey, and you get McCaffrey with Nico Collins and Mike Evans at the end of your 2-3 turn, you can come back, get CJ Stroud in the 4th, 5th round, and now you, in theory, have the QB1 in Stroud, hopefully a top 12 receiver in Collins, plus the best running back in fantasy in McCaffrey. So it's not just about building high scoring rosters, but it's also balancing how all of that works within who you have already taken and how many other positions you need.
So essentially, Joe,
Yeah.
unlike with investments where you kind of want to maybe have a hedge or protect yourself, with best ball you're trying to win, so you want to double down on your thoughts as opposed to trying to hedge so that you're not the worst. Like coming in 5th place does you nothing. So you'd rather rather than hedging at all, you'd rather double down and hope you're right.
No, well, that's exactly it. So these have kind of fallen by the wayside. They do still exist, but back in the MFL 10 days, MFL 10 had like 50-50 contests where if you finished in the top half of the league, you got a payout, and it didn't matter if you finished 1st or 6th, you got the same payout. That's when we talk about best ball nowadays, when we talk about DraftKings best ball, everything is filtered through the lens of a high entry, high prize tournament where it's a very outsized pricing structure where the closer you get to the top of the contest, you get exponentially more winnings. And less than half of the field, way less than half of the field, ends up actually cashing. So the difference between 4th place and 12th place is way, way less significant than the difference between 4th place and 1st place. So that is what you want to do. So as Graham said, when you do a best ball draft, you have to operate from the position that the picks that I made in the first 2 or 3 rounds of this draft are the correct picks. You have, even if you didn't like the pick when you made it. Oh God, I can't believe I took Deebo Samuel in the 2nd round. But you have to assume when you're drafting that pick was the correct pick. And then you want to get Brock Purdy, and then you want to maximize the potential if that pick was correct. So that's how you have to operate and think when you're in a best ball draft.
So all these tournaments that we're entering, basically the top 2 teams after the first 14 weeks advance into the playoffs in weeks 15 through 17. And that's where all the money's at. So we have to have a mentality where it's like Ricky Bobby. You're either first or you're last, seriously. And that's where stacking comes in. I'm completely fine having some teams where I finished 10th or 11th or 12th because my stacks did horrible. However, you're looking for that one golden roster, that one team that can take down everybody. And in my opinion, stacking is the easiest way to maximize what happens when you're right. And it's also a great way to kind of maximize your downside. Like think of it this way. Last year, if you had CJ Stroud, Nico Collins, and Tank Dell on the same team, but it's the week where Nico Collins hurt his calf. Tank Dell goes off for 125 and 2. Now you didn't lose out on Nico Collins. You had Tank Dell replacing him. And in large field tournaments, we need to have massive, massive upside. You're fighting against hundreds of thousands sometimes of different teams. And the only way to take down these tournaments is through stacking. You look at the last couple of years, basically all of the teams that make it to the finals in week 17 have stacked players, and not only just stacked players from the same team, but stacked players from week 17 and 16 games, Ross. We're getting so deep into it now. We're basically the last two winners of a large field best ball tournament have had game stacks. They've had not just player, quarterback to receiver stacks. They've had week 17 game stacks where those players, we're projecting.
I like it.
Yeah, we're projecting.
Graham,
yes, sir.
Unbelievable stuff. Really appreciate you coming on the show. Check him out on social media at Graham Barfield. Joe's at FG_Dolan. I'm at Ross Tucker NFL. I'm stuffed. We're full.
Thanks for tuning in to Fantasy Feast. Make sure to also check out the Ross Tucker Football Podcast, Even Money, and College Draft, all on the DraftKings Network, YouTube, or subscribe to the podcasts on your favorite platform.